Hi folks, my name is Marco Sescalzi. I'm an organizer of the last 11 years. I love queer people, and I'm the founder of We Believe in Deep Canvassing. People are tired, people are angry, and people feel betrayed. They don't understand how we've allowed the powerful to get away with so many different things. They don't understand how our system has gotten so unrepresentative. They don't understand how they're supposed to trust the government again, or for many people, how they were supposed to trust it in the first place. I'm joined here today with our endorsed candidate in New Jersey's 8th Congressional District, Mussab Ali, to deep canvass you and to talk a little bit about why values are driving your campaign and why biases will not. So, that being said, Mussab, would you care to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Mussab Ali. I'm running for Congress in New Jersey's 8th District. We're actually here today in my childhood park. This is where I learned how to play basketball. Made a lot of shots here and missed a lot of shots here, but it's exciting to be back and sort of think through how we're thinking about our campaign and the values that are attached to it.
Excellent. Terrific. And would you care to introduce yourself as well?
My name is Dante. I'm one of Mussab Ali's interns for his congressional campaign. I've been working with the campaign since late February, early March, and I love it.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much, Dante. On a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 means that you might support further privatization of our healthcare system, where 10 means that you support this universal healthcare system, or you support the government generally funding the vast majority of our healthcare costs, and 5 means you're somewhere in the middle. Well, how would you define yourself on the scale?
I think I'm a 10 out of 10. I think that, look, when we look at every other industrialized country in the world, everyone else has figured out universal healthcare. And people keep talking about this idea of how do we afford it, right? I mean, right now, the cost of healthcare in the United States is significantly higher than most other countries around the world, and we don't have better outcomes. So you were talking about a failing system where people are putting all this money into healthcare, and yet we are not seeing the fruit of our labor. So to me, it only makes sense that we shift to a universal healthcare system where everybody is able to be covered, right? And I think what's interesting is people don't realize how much money they're paying in premiums, right? How much money employers are putting into premiums, and also how much this sort of locks you in with the employer that you have, right? Literally right now, if you do not have employment, you are sort of at the mercy of the government anyway, right? To figure out if you can get healthcare, and if you can't, well, then you're sort of in this position where right now, your employer controls not only your job and your paycheck, but also if you get access to health insurance.
Yeah. I think that's absolute. I think that's right on the money. I think that we absolutely have the most expensive outcomes. It's absolutely the most expensive for everybody involved, and there's just so many different ways that it impacts us, not just in terms of our wallets, but also culturally, socially, politically, all these different things. Are there any sort of experiences that inform your position?
Yeah, I mean, I was very lucky, right? When I was growing up, to be honest, I really never had to go to the hospital, right? Never broke a bone, barely got sick to the point where I need to go to the hospital. But then when I was 23, I was out of nowhere had this cough, and then it turned out that through the chest x-rays, we found out that I actually had cancer. And you don't usually expect that at such a young age, right? And if it wasn't for the health insurance that my mom had, I literally would not have been able to get the treatment that I did. I mean, Marcus, I was literally on a clinical trial, right? My cancer had gotten to a point where my doctor was like, hey, if we give you the traditional treatment, you will be back here in 6 months. The only thing that we can do is put you on this clinical trial. And again, I only got access to that because I was able to be covered under my parents' health insurance. And that was mostly because of the expansion of Obamacare, right? And so you think about how different my life would have been had I not gotten access, right? I mean, there's a possibility that I'm not here today. Yeah. And so I think those are things that I sort of weigh in my mind of I was lucky, but how many people aren't that lucky, right? And also on a day-to-day basis, there are so many people that are facing crushing medical debt simply because they got sick, right? If we firmly believe this idea that healthcare is a human right, the idea that we as people should have the ability to live lives where we're not always sick, well, this is exactly where the government comes in, right? To solve this really complex problem.
Gosh. When I think about, I've had thankfully a very similar experience in terms of in your earlier life, never necessarily having to incur that many medical expenses. But I think about especially now that I'm at an age where I'm I'm of course off of my parents' insurance. I am now going to live what is now the remainder of my life working for my employer. And I think about the constant fear that I have around this sort of making sure that this need is met. I think about the fact that if health really is so valuable, or it is one of the core functions of government, then if we've exported it to private providers, it feels like the only value in my health towards the system that we have is if it is used. But that, to me, not only is that so chronically unfair, but that feels like a waste of some potential, because what could we get if we invested in each other's health instead?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's two parts to that, right? So I totally agree. I mean, the idea that like we should invest in people's health, but I think the other thing that's a little more sinister is this idea that like, you know, if I'm telling you, hey, you either are going to pay these bills or you are going to die. I mean, like, if you're thinking about maximizing profit, like what better way to do it, right? Like, you know, there's some other things that you can say, like, all right, like, you know, if you're picking between a Honda and a Lamborghini, right? Like, okay, fine. Like, I can just get a Honda and I'll still get around. But if I have to pick literally between I'm going to live or I'm going to die, right? Like, think about the incentive of how much money you can take out of a person's life, right? You can say to them literally like, whatever your life is, and for some people, for the rest of your life, you will be paying back this debt just to continue to live. And I don't think it has to be that way. And it's not in a lot of countries, right? In a lot of these countries, you basically go in for treatment, they take care of you, and they're like, okay, covered by the government.
Gosh. So it sounds like, based on the conversation we've been having so far, that this sort of, I think we've mentioned this fairness, but we've also this sinister quality, or this lack of value for life. I think that is something that we both feel very, very strongly is not right, and I think it's something that really seems to be guiding you. What would you say?
Yeah, I would say it guides me in the sense of like, I think the overarching theme of a lot of our policies is just human dignity, right? The idea that like we're not, you know, we're investing in schools and hospitals here, not bombing people abroad, right? That comes back to basic human dignity, right? Let's invest in healthcare. Let's invest in education. Let's not invest in these endless wars, right? The same way we talk about universal healthcare, it's about dignity, right? Like, it should be a human right for people to be able to say like, oh, like, I want to be able to live a life where I'm healthy, right? Like, I should be able to say that as like, okay, as a human, I have that basic human dignity where I feel like I can go to the hospital and my needs are taken care of. And so to me, like, I think a lot of this, you know, even around our immigration policy, right? Abolishing ICE is about saying like, hey, like, human beings should not be treated the way that ICE has been treating them, right? Just like picking them off the street and detaining them. To me, like, it all stems from that one theme of like, how are we viewing our neighbors, right? How are we viewing people in the society? Do we view them as like a burden on our society, or do we actually view them as our neighbors and our friends and people that we should be providing for?
No. Well, as someone, as an immigrant to this country myself, of course, I'm so isolated by this idea that why do we always have to talk about, why are immigrants always in a negative connotation? You know, why do immigrants always come at a cost? Have I not given anything to the society I've spent the last 11 years organizing for?
No. Yeah, I mean, I think what's happened is like the right has done this really good job of like demonizing immigrants as a whole, right? I mean, the idea of like Native Americans, right? Like the sort of like the far right movement has sort of taken Native American and made that a term that describes white men. Right? So like they have sort of stripped away this identity of like everyone else being an American and sort of readjusting to say, look, like what it means to be an American is somebody who is a white man who is in this country. Like, that is what it means to be native to this country. And so like they're rewriting history, right? Because again, that's not true. Like, that's not who's here first. But also like all of us are children of immigrants, right? Like even the Caucasian people who moved here came in different waves of immigration where there were different, you know, groups of people who came to this country. And so I think there's this like really, you know, crazy dynamic that's happening right now where being an immigrant is something that's looked down upon versus I think for the majority of our history, right? Like, this has been the nation that's welcomed immigrants because we understand the value that they bring.
Yeah. Gosh. It's certainly a lot to think about, but I think that especially maybe there's an opportunity in these times in the sense of what is the right thing to do, or at least the more caring values to have, does seem to be the most productive path forward.
Yeah, certainly hope so.
And Dante, I'd love to ask you as well, because of course you play a very valuable role in this campaign. So I'd love to ask you, what does it feel like for you to hear Mussab say this?
It honestly feels really good seeing how our current representative and our representatives almost across the entire country do very little to almost nothing about our healthcare system. Like growing up, the only politicians I've ever actually seen like really care about the healthcare system was Bernie Sanders in Vermont, and seeing how that like in the long run it could have a large effect, but like hometown local, it really does not do much. And yeah.
Gotcha. So, what do you have? Can I ask if you have if anyone that you know or anyone that you care about has a deal with any medical expenses or anything like that?
Actually, yeah. When I was, I believe, in kindergarten, my appendix exploded, and so at the time my parents did not have health insurance for me yet. Well, they did, but it was kind of an issue.
Okay.
And so, like, I was young, obviously, but like knowing like more recently, especially like knowing that it was such a burden on them, as of something like we couldn't control. Okay, so yeah, so just like personally knowing like now as a grown adult, like knowing how much of a burden it was as or something we could not control, it really bothers me knowing that if our politicians like really worked and try to get this like universal healthcare through as do most developed countries do, it would really just like it would lift like the biggest burden on almost all families out there.
Yeah.
And also like being an uncle of like almost 9, knowing that my siblings like God forbid they have to go through that, it's something that should not happen, and there's no reason for it to be.
Yeah. Gosh. So it sounds like this prioritization of life and sort of the consequences of what happens when we don't do that, the consequences had in your life. It sounds like that you. It sounds like you also agree with that. It sounds like that's also really driving your participation with this campaign.
Of course, yes.
It's really terrific. Wow. So, folks, when I think about the 100,000 Americans that I've had the pleasure of being able to talk to about politics, I don't think a single one of them would have been able to afford the medical debt that they might have incurred if they were in either of your positions. If I am thinking about this sort of, and we've kind of touched on this already, but this sort of impact that healthcare has just on us as a people, right? Just psychologically, in the sense of, if I don't feel that my health is being prioritized, I feel kind of valueless, right? It makes me feel like I can't fight back because the people that are supposed to be leading me, the people that are supposed to be ensuring that government is accomplishing one of its key duties, is telling me to sit down, stop complaining, and work. Mussab, I wanted to ask you, what does it mean to you to have this really volunteer-driven campaign?
Yeah, I think what's incredible is so many people who come from different walks of life understand that what is at stake, right? Because to me, like, you know, I understand very personally as someone who's been in politics for some time, like the only way change happens is you have to get people in power who actually start to care about everyday people. And I think more and more people like waking up to this idea that like, hey, we need to fight against the machine. We need to fight against, you know, these sort of corporate, you know, PACs that have taken over our politics. We need to fight against the billionaires that are funding all these politicians and sort of like navigating towards policy that, you know, benefits them. It doesn't benefit everyday people. And so getting everyday people to come out and say, listen, you know, my time is extremely valuable, right? In ways where, you know, they are sacrificing their time that could be spent literally trying to, you know, get the small luxuries in life. Instead, spending that time, you know, fighting for our campaign, fighting for what we believe in. To me, it's really inspiring, right? Because in some ways, it helps us keep going.
Wow. So, and Dante, what has it meant for you so far to be part of this campaign? You know, going out and doing this work in the community. What have you sort of noticed? What have you taken to that experience?
Well, like one of the first things I've noticed when I first met Mussab, he's honestly one of the nicest people you've ever meet, truly.
Nice people.
Honestly, being on the campaign has taught me a lot about how politics truly does work, like more than just like what the naked eye can see. It's also given me an experience to like be able to connect with people, like one-on-one with people, find out more about their issues, find out like more like what they care about the most, like what they want to vote for, who they vote for, and it's really like an eye-opener, honestly, truly.
That's excellent. So I suppose I wanted to ask both of you then if we have this opportunity to do something, so if we have this path ahead of us that is so clearly defined by our values, and we have this opportunity to really take advantage of this moment, it seems to me like if people miss out on the opportunity to vote or donate or certainly to volunteer for this campaign, it seems like they might be missing out on an opportunity to ensure that their needs are met and that their community's needs are met. I don't know what you think about that.
Look, I think that for me, I understand like sort of what's at stake, and I think where some people may not recognize is how much power they actually have, right? Is I think that we've been sort of conditioned by the system to believe that we can't make a difference. And I think that this is a real opportunity to make a real difference, to send a message to a system that says like, hey, we are sick and tired of the status quo. We want to fight back against the powers that be, and we really want to, you know, bring a new movement into life.
Yeah, that's excellent. Gosh, and Dante, when you see people going out and volunteering alongside you, or you see them show up to these canvas shifts, you see them want to engage with the community, you see them train and whatnot, how does that feel?
It honestly truly is heartwarming seeing how there's people out there who is like, we have an intern who's only 12 years old. It's truly heartwarming to see people as young as that age wanted to get out there and wanted to like make a difference in the world instead of just like relying on the status quo, like Mussab said, or just waiting for somebody like else to make a change. Like they actually want to make them change themselves, or at least like help and work towards it.
Yeah. Oh, that's excellent. And they want to make this change for themselves, and so it makes you. So I mean, imagine, but based on what you're telling me, it makes you. It sounds like it makes you feel important, right?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
That's super exciting. Gosh. So, folks, I think you've heard it here. I think there's always more. There's always so much more than we can talk about, but thankfully you do have an opportunity to talk about it more by participating in this campaign, by donating to it, and of course by voting for our endorsed candidate, Mussab Ali, in the New Jersey's 8th Congressional District Democratic primary on June 2nd. I think at this time where we see all of this discord in our politics and we clearly want solutions, we believe in deep canvassing only endorses candidates that take being values-driven seriously, that want to confront biases in their communities and allow the community to move forward on their own terms. And ultimately, we'll continue to sit down and do the work, whether that's on the campaign or in office.
Ready? Okay, team.
Let's go canvass.
It was such a burden on them. That's of course like we couldn't control. It was
I really just stopped the job.
No, it's a whole campaign. It's really a whole campaign to stop the chop. I mean, imagine you live in this neighborhood, man, all day. You just hear this.